Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com, and welcome back to our continuing series, Blueprint of the Soul, where we're endeavoring to become the architects of our own destiny by learning to read our astrological birth chart, our own personal blueprint. And of course, in order to read your birth chart, in order to read any astrological chart, you need to learn how to speak the language of astrology, because astrology is really a language unto itself. It's a symbolic language, right? It's a visual language. It's a graphical language in many ways. If you've ever looked at a birth chart and seen all the symbols and the aspects and the information that's encoded in all those symbols, you understand you really need to know what all of those symbols mean before you can start to read and interpret a birth chart properly. So that's what we're doing with this series. We're starting with the basics, the fundamentals, and we're learning what all of these components of the language of astrology mean. And we're starting with the fundamentals. We're taking this energy approach and explaining how everything is energy, and really astrology is a language for interpreting our energy, for explaining how we use our energy as individuals and as in relationships in many different ways. So we're taking this elemental approach, and we've been building on these fundamental concepts. So, the disclaimer I'll make, as I make at the top of all these videos, this is a series and we are building from one idea to the next. So if you haven't watched the previous episodes in the series, I strongly recommend going back and watching those first and getting caught up, because we are expanding this conceptual framework and building this foundation from the ground up. So you're gonna get a lot more out of this video and all the videos going forward if you've already watched the previous videos. Now, if you're just coming into one of these episodes because you're interested in one of the individual topics, maybe you're a water sign and that brought you to this video, maybe the algorithm brought you here, welcome, and you're welcome to watch this particular video. But again, if you haven't watched the previous ones, go back, do yourself a favor, especially if you're new to astrology, because that's the goal of this series, is to help anyone who really is unfamiliar with it and is interested to learn astrology. This is going to be a great tool for you guys. So that's my caveat. That's our introduction. Of course, we will do some quick review of some of our main fundamental topics that we're using and our building blocks, if you will, so we can get caught up and set the table for what we're going to do in this episode. So, of course, we've been taking this elemental approach. We've been really focusing on the 4 fundamental elements that inform all of astrology, really. They definitely inform the zodiac, as we've been learning, right? And those elements are the fire, earth, air, and water elements, respectively. And we've been showing how these represent the energy substance of our experience. And in discussing the elements, we introduced the concept of polarities, this idea that everything follows this law of polarity. It's one of the natural laws of the universe within which we live. So we get these polar opposites of masculine, feminine, yang, yin, active, passive, day or night, sun and moon, good and evil, right? And we've been referring to this elegant and profound symbol of the yang yin, which we get from the Taoist tradition of ancient China, which is really just reminding us that the polarities are a unity, right? We can't have one without the other. They are really an intermingling of both, a reflection, right? There is no masculine without feminine. There is no day without night, right? This is a really important fundamental principle to understanding the elements, because we break them down by polarity. And we've shown how we have 2 complementary pairs of elements, with fire and air participating in the masculine or yang side of the pole, while earth and water participate in the feminine or yin side of the pole. So fire and air will complement each other because they have the same polarity. Likewise, earth and water. And elements of opposing polarities will tend to be more incompatible. Fire and air have more difficulty interfacing with earth and water, and vice versa. And then the third key concept we've introduced in discussing these signs of the zodiac are the modes, the modalities. And we've shown these 3 particular vibrational patterns through which the four elements can express themselves. When there's the cardinal mode, which is this outward moving directional force, which we describe as being of a centrifugal force. There's the fixed mode, which is the inward moving, right, centripetal energy. And then there's the mutable mode, which we're describing as a spiraling energy, an energy that wants to distribute, to disseminate, to mutate, to evolve. Okay? So those are the three modes, and this is really the basic building blocks with which we are building the wheel of the zodiac and constructing all of the signs of the zodiac, right? These two polarities, three modalities, four elements. And we've been building the wheel of the zodiac and learning to orient ourselves in this very particular way by starting here at the 9 o'clock position and working counterclockwise, dividing our circle into 12 equal parts and assigning each of the 12 zodiac signs. And in the past few episodes, we've been breaking each of the signs down and grouping them by their elemental triads, right? So we started by looking at the fire signs, this fire trinity of Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. We then explored the earth trinity, where we have Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. And in the last episode, we discussed the air trinity, which is Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. So that gets us caught up and sets the table for what we're going to explore in this episode, which is the water trinity. All right, so we're about to complete our exploration of all of the signs of the zodiac and our elemental approach by looking at the fourth and final grouping of elemental signs, which is the water signs, the water trinity, right? We started with fire, air, earth, and now we're going to explore the element of water and how that element expresses itself uniquely through 3 of the 12 zodiac signs. So we'll jump back to our graphic and our wheel of the zodiac that we've been working with here, and we'll focus on the 3 water signs of the zodiac, which are going to be Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So we'll extrapolate those 3 signs out and get our usual elegant triangulation pattern in the wheel here, and we reinforce that by showing how these form a perfect equilateral triangle within our perfect circle of the wheel, because all elemental signs are always going to be 120 degrees apart from each other, right? Within this 360 degree wheel. So this is why elements combine elegantly. Let's just say that. And something that we're going to learn more about when we get to the episode on the aspects. We're already learning something very profound about aspects by exploring the signs in their elemental grouping in this way. But for now, let's just focus in on the water trinity. And as we've always done, we'll work through the signs in a particular direction, right? We start with the cardinal sign, move through the fixed sign, and then end by considering the mutable sign within the triad. So in order to get a sense of what all of these 3 signs of the zodiac share in common, well, they all are waterborn. They're born of water. So we should recall what we discussed and explored in terms of what the element of water represents. What are the qualities of water? And of course, this is that emotional feeling nature, right? If we consider the 4 personality types that are represented by the 4 elements, we had fire, which is intuition. We had earth, which is sensation. We had air, which is thinking. Now we get to water, which is feeling, right? It's all about the emotional feeling nature, right? Empathy, right? It's sensitivity, love, right? Intimacy, all of these water-like qualities, right? Now, we associate water with the oceanic, with the depths of the unconscious, which is a really interesting metaphor, right? If we think about, the ocean surface, it can look very calm and placid at the top, but beneath the surface of the water in the ocean, it is just teeming with life and activity. The water element tends to express that sort of underwater, deep emotional nature to life, to the personality, etc. So undoubtedly, we get that sense of depth. We get the sense of merger, right? The water element wants to merge with the other. It understands and appreciates that we are all connected. It's as if we're all connected in a sea of energy, and no one is separated from it. We may all feel in our individuality that we are a unique drop of the ocean, but the water element reminds us that we are all connected. We are just expressions of that ocean of experience. So, and we also discussed with all these archetypes, there's always a shadow side, right? This sensitivity can display itself as being overly sensitive. There's this sense of vulnerability to all of the water signs because of this water element. The water element can present itself in a very suspicious and secretive manner, right? It can be paralyzed by rather irrational fears, right? Because of that unconscious nature, right? There can be this compulsion to water. Obsessive compulsive type of behaviors are very typical of the water element. So that gives us a good foundation for exploring the water trinity. We're learning to see the elemental substrate from which all of these three particular signs are being created. So these are water-born. They're born for this element. They're born to feel. They're born to emote, right? They're born to go deep and to use that feeling nature of our humanity and express it in unique ways. So now let's jump in and let's start to look at these three signs, and as always, starting with the cardinal sign within the element. So Cancer, cardinal water. How is Cancer uniquely expressing this water element, this emotional feeling nature, which of course, because it's water, it's yin, it's feminine, right? It has that passive, receptive, introverted quality to it. It's susceptible to the laws of gravity, right? Water always seeks its lowest point. It always returns to the ocean. From the highest mountain, eventually water will find its way back to the bottom of the ocean, right? This is a great metaphor for water and for its sort of downward moving energy, inward and downward. Now that brings up an interesting sort of contradiction when we consider what is cardinal water in this archetype of Cancer, because when we think about cardinality, this directional force, right? It's action outward from the center in a definite direction. And we use the idea of a centrifugal force when talking about the cardinal energy, that cardinal vibrational pattern. And we can see how that might be in a conflict with the yin essence of the water element, which tends to be more centripetal, more inward focused. And we saw this when we examined the earth signs with Capricorn, right, which is the cardinal earth sign. And of course, earth and water are both of the yin or feminine essence. So we get this sort of push-pull, almost paradoxical energy with these two signs, Cancer and Capricorn. This is a really interesting thing about Cancer, and I think one of the reasons Cancer can be one of the more difficult signs of the zodiac to really understand and wrap your brain around. And Cancer and Capricorn share this sort of almost paradoxical dynamic, because we have a mode that wants to move outward, directional, cardinal, and we have a polarity that wants to move inward, that is retentive, right? That wants to pull everything in. All of these water signs want to pull things towards them with that yin essence, right? And in that emotional feeling nature. So this is a really interesting way of understanding the very fundamental nature of the Cancer archetype. And when you consider its symbol, which is the crab, it's very revealing, because think about how a crab moves, right? It doesn't move straight forward in a line. It almost moves in this side-to-side crab-like motion, right? It's like this lateral movement. It's going forward by moving back and forth in almost like a zigzag pattern. And it's also very protective and insecure and secretive, right? Because it'll move backward and then kind of cautiously move forward. Also consider the very anatomy of a crab, right? It's got this hard shell exterior that protects it, right? Almost protecting this really soft, vulnerable inner self, right? Which is very water, right? So you think about the inner self of the crab being water, being yin, needing protection, and that outer shell being its cardinality, being its directional focus. It allows it to move out in the world and feel safe and express itself, right? So real interesting to consider the symbol of the crab when understanding the sign of Cancer and starting to get a sense of why that is, that connection, because we understand this elemental, this polarity nature of the water element coupled with the directionality of the cardinal mode and that vibrational pattern makes more sense. So Cancer types they do want to be emotionally expressive. There is this desire to express itself, but it's still water, so it's going to do it cautiously, deliberately, right? And it's interesting, we talked about the cardinal fire sign being Aries, right? And we talked about it being like a flamethrower. It takes that fire energy in a cardinal way, and it's just, whoosh, right? And so by virtue of that same analogy, we might expect Cancer to be, well, like a fire hose. It takes the water element and expresses it in a cardinal way. But it's really not like that, because water doesn't work like fire, right? It's not outward, it's inward. So we need a different metaphor and a different framework for how we think about Cancer, how we think about cardinal mode expressing itself through the water element. Much like we had to look at Capricorn a little differently. That earth energy, which tends to be, grounded and yin, right, receptive, having to express itself. And we saw how Capricorn does that through building structure, right? Cancer does that by building relationship, by building community, by building family, by building an emotional security, an emotional foundation, a home, right? Cancer is associated with the home. And if you think about it, Capricorn is the actual physical building, the four walls, the structure of the home. But Cancer is what makes a house a home, right? Capricorn is the house, Cancer is the home. Cancer is that feeling, is that relationship that we get through family, that we get through our ancestry, we get through our sense of place, that we get through the past. Cancer is very focused on the past, on tradition, right? Because of that, like I said, water wants to pull itself in and set roots. Another great analogy, right? Cancer is associated with our roots, right? Our ancestry, our DNA, all the people who have come before, the roots of our culture. But think about roots of a tree. They grow downward and inward and seek to absorb the nutrients and the minerals from the soil so that the tree can grow up. But most of what's going on with a tree is happening below the surface, right? So earth and water, we can see how these two elements sort of operate in the same modality, in the same elemental foundational principle, using the yin essence, retaining, receiving. So this is starting to give us a sense of this, Cancer, like I said, it can be a little bit more of a complex archetype, because anytime we get a sign that has a conflict between its mode and its polarity, it tends to have a little bit of this paradoxical push-pull tension within the archetype. And if we go and pull up our word cloud here for Cancer and start to explore this cardinal water sign, we get a sense of what's going on and what we can expect this archetype to represent. And of course, the key word we get with Cancer is I feel, right? It is, of course, water. It is of the feeling nature, and it is the most expressive as cardinal of that feeling nature, which is why it tends to be the sense of being protective, right? It has this instinct to be the caretaker, to be the parental figure. It has a maternal quality, which I think it gets much from its planetary ruler, the moon, which is the ultimate sort of mother moon or sister moon. It has that feminine maternal instinct of protecting, of nurturing. All right. So all of those qualities we can see associated with Cancer. Now, of course, we always can pull out some of the shadow sides of each of these archetypes, and, we can see how, well, Cancer could be fussy. It can be manipulative, and it's a feature of all of the water signs that we'll see. This is a very watery quality, manipulation, emotional manipulation, because that's where water gets its power in some ways. It can be a little touchy or tender or snappy, right? The crab, right? Because it's insecure. There's a deep insecurity to all the water signs as well. That's another of the characteristics, and Cancer is no exception in displaying that insecurity. But it also has that instinct to move out and forward and build relationship and build family and build emotional structure. So there's like a push-pull tendency with Cancer. But we're starting to get a sense of what water looks like through the cardinal mode. So we can now compare that to the second water sign of the Trinity, which is Scorpio. And now we move to a different expression of the water element. Now we're expressing our emotional feeling yin essence through the fixed mode that wants to consolidate, to harness, to retain that emotional feeling nature, right? And it's centripetal. So here we get the opposite of what we just explored with Cancer. With Scorpio, there is no conflict between its polarity and its modality. Yin and fixed are really compatible, right? They both express that inward pull, that centripetal force. And again, this was similar that we saw when we explored the earth signs and we looked at Taurus, which is fixed earth. Earth is also of the yin polarity, so fixed earth is much like fixed water. It's a very natural expression of this element and of this polarity. And as we've said with all of the signs in all of these triads, typically the fixed sign of any element tends to express that element in its most powerful expression. And I think Scorpio is no exception, right? Anyone who knows people who are Scorpio, is working with Scorpio energy, you're probably well aware it's a really powerful sign. And we understand why, right? Because now Scorpio is able to take this water element, this emotion, this feeling sensibility, and to harness it and to pull it in towards itself in a way that Cancer doesn't, because Cancer is trying to share and distribute in a way, put that energy out there. Scorpio is pulling it in, right? And I always think of Scorpio as like an emotional whirlpool, right? It's pulling everything in to it. And if you've ever, like I said, if you've ever been in relationships with Scorpio types, they're very attractive. There's like this magnetic attraction that they have. They're very powerful people. And it's an emotional power. It's a subtle power. It's an unconscious power. It can be a very psychic power. You don't even know why you're attracted to these Scorpios, but there's something dark and mysterious and that pulls you in. Really pulls you in. They're physical, they're emotional, they're expressive, but they also have that shadow side of water. They can be secretive and suspicious, right? And if we consider the symbol of Scorpio, which is the scorpion, right? It's another interesting animal that represents this sign, because we have the crab with its sort of side-to-side motion. The scorpion also has a very purposeful, protective, defensive sort of modality to it. And if it is attacked or feels threatened, right, it's got that tail that can sting, just comes out of nowhere. And if you've ever been stung by a Scorpio personality, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So again, we're starting to get a better sense of Scorpio by nature of its symbol, by nature of its mode, but consider that sense of it being, pulling things to or towards it. And if we flip back here and go to our Scorpio constellation of qualities and start to look at what fixed water might look like, we get the keyword I desire, right? Scorpio is all about the desire nature. Scorpio, because it's about power and emotional power, it tends to be associated with the power of sexuality, the alluring power of sexuality. And again, interesting, we talk about Scorpio's opposite being Taurus. The fixed earth sign is balanced and is in oppositional harmony with the fixed water sign. Taurus is also associated with sex, as we explored, but it's a different way of looking at our sexuality. Taurus is all about the procreative side of sex, because Taurus is about survival, right? And it's about earth, it's about security. So you think about the survival of the species. We are a species that reproduces sexually. So sexual reproduction is a big concern of the Taurus archetype. Now with Scorpio, we're getting a different side to our sexuality. This is the emotional side to it. It's not just the matter-of-fact physical act of sex. This is the emotional act of sex. This is the deep merging that takes place, right? And this gets into the water element. It gets into vulnerability. I mean, what is more vulnerable than literally exposing yourself, being naked before another human being and literally physically interpenetrating each other and becoming really one person in some ways. We often think about that sexual union is the merging of two souls, the merging of two people becoming one. That's Scorpio, right? That's that urge to merge that Scorpio has, which is why Scorpio is associated with sexuality and it's associated with sexual power, right? Because, as we said, it's a fixed sign. So it's taking that emotion and empowering itself, pulling it in. And interesting, it's insecure, as all the water signs are. There's this underlying insecurity to the water element and thus the water signs. And typically what you see with Scorpio is it is a sense of a lack. Scorpio has this ability to see itself for what it isn't, for what it does not have, but it desires, it wants for itself. So that desire nature goes and seeks that thing which it perceives to lack, but that others have, and seeks to merge with the other so that it can possess and have the object of its desire, be it a thing, be it a quality, be it any person, place, or thing can be absorbed by Scorpio and thus gain its power. It does it by this sense of osmosis, by this merging instinct that the Scorpio archetype has. So that really is, Scorpio does like all these archetypes. And if we go back to the graph here, there are some shadow qualities to Scorpio. That intensity, that magnetism, that mystery, can also be very secretive. It can be vindictive, right? We can get this obsessive compulsive nature to Scorpio. It's often associated with trauma, particularly sexual trauma, right? Sexual abuse often comes under the rubric of the Scorpio archetype. The idea of sex, death, and rebirth, that sort of perennial cycle, right? That's a very scorpionic realm to explore. And part of that is associated with its rulership. It's ruled by the planet Pluto, which is the planet of transformation, of sex, death, and rebirth, of powerful, eruptive, unconscious force and energy, which is why it was assigned rulership of Scorpio when it was discovered. Scorpio's traditional ruler is Mars, which has that active energy. Pluto is considered the higher octave of Mars, and which is why it's been assigned to Scorpio. So, there is this sense of transformation with the Scorpio archetype by nature of its Pluto rulership. And it just is in keeping with what we're sort of getting with this fixed water sign and what we've been discussing. It's power, powerful, and an obsession with power. I think of all of the archetypes, of all the 12 signs of the zodiac, Scorpio is the most power obsessed. Now, as we've been doing with all the signs, we consider how the energy is moving, the element is moving through these 3 signs in a particular fashion by virtue of the mode, right? So we're moving from this cardinal water of Cancer that wants to establish, that wants to put down roots, right? But that takes effort. That takes a cardinal energy to put down your roots. And it putting that water emotional feeling element out there in its relationships, in its family, in its siblings, in its past, right? Where Scorpio then takes that sense of stability that Cancer brings and pulls it into itself, wants to empower itself through those relationships, through the others, through its interaction with the world, by getting what it lacks and by osmosis absorbing that power and that energy and that emotion. So there's this directionality that we're starting to see within the water triad. So now that sets us up for the exploration of the third of the water trinity, which is Pisces. So now we're exploring mutable water, the feeling, the emotional nature, the yin, the feminine essence, being expressed through the vibrational pattern that is mutability, that is the spiraling energy, that wants to share, that wants to relate, that wants to communicate and harmonize, right? It's fluid and dynamic. And, that word fluid makes us think of water. So we can see that there's a compatibility, I think, not quite as strongly correlated as fixed water, but I think mutable water certainly has a certain characteristic that is receptive, that seems to mutually enhance each other. And Pisces is really the quintessential mutable water energy. And if we think about the archetype of Pisces and think about what mutable water might mean, right? Water does seek to flow out. It wants to flow down, right? We talked about the highest mountain water, that snow melt, eventually makes its way to the bottom of the sea and then gets pulled back by the air and the heat in this continuous cycle, right? Well, mutable water, we can see how that would really want to get out there and sort of dissolve boundaries, to move into places so that it can share this emotional feeling nature. And that's, Pisces is, I think, again, one of the most complex, perhaps, of all of these 12 archetypes. And it's the last one we're discussing, and it's the last of the 12 archetypes. It's 12 of 12. If we consider it around the wheel, we end with Pisces. And in a lot of ways, all of the other 12 archetypes sort of pour into Pisces. It is a container, in a way, for all of the other archetypes. It is the most universal of all the archetypes, which makes it pretty complex. It can be hard to wrap your brain around this Pisces archetype. And if you've ever worked with Pisces energy, it's tricky. It's, as we'll see if we pull up the word cloud here for what we'd expect from this Pisces energy. Well, its key word is I believe. There's this sense of faith, this optimism, this very deep connection to source. That's what we always associate with Pisces. The oneness, right? The one love, universal love, right? Not sexual love that we got with Scorpio. This is love for all humanity, love for all sentient beings, love for non-sentient beings, for beings we can't even identify. It's that universal love. Everything is connected, right? This is the most expressive of that oceanic nature that we associate with the water element. Pisces really gets it. It gets that we are all one. It gets that each one of us may be an individual expression, right? We may be that drop in the ocean, but we are all part of the same source. We are all swimming in the same sea of energy that everything in creation is produced from, right? The source, the one, the creator, the God, if you will. So spirituality and soulfulness, the idea of the collective, the transcendent, all of these things, the universal, right? This is Pisces. Of course, we can see some of the shadow sides that we might get from Pisces, this sense of deception, this sense of vulnerability. It can be vacillating. It can be self-effacing. It can often be confused. One of the words I often use to describe Pisces is delusional, right? It's susceptible to that because it wants to believe in everything. It's so trusting that it can become the victim of its own optimism and faith. So it can be taken advantage of. One of the things often associated with Pisces is the notion of addiction and alcoholism. And you think about why that might be, right? If here's an archetype that just wants to dissolve its boundaries, separate the barriers between others, between ourselves and nature, between ourselves and the universe and the cosmos, to just return to the source of all that is and to recognize that connection, right? Well, it's kind of what drugs and alcohol do, right? If you get really drunk or really high on specific kinds of drugs, it breaks down the barriers, right? Alcohol is the great inhibitor. It lowers our inhibition. It allows us to free flow a little more, right? And pathogens and drugs of that nature tend to break down our barriers and allow us to experience certainly the psychedelics. And I think Scorpio and Pisces are definitely associated with psychedelic drugs. It's that boundary dissolving experience that Pisces yearns for. It's return to source. It's knowing itself on a soul nature. The concept of soul itself is associated with all the water signs, and we can see how it evolves from Cancer, from establishing the root of the self in the soul, to Scorpio, which is soul interacting with another soul in a one-on-one intimate relationship and soul merger, to Pisces, which is the universal soul, that we are all one. We are all from the source soul, if you will. So really difficult archetype, very bold, broad, universal archetype. And, can be susceptible to being deluded, to being deceived. Almost this sort of naivete, if you will, to the Pisces archetype. But we always have to consider its highest vibration. What is it trying to do? It's trying to connect us all to the universal love, the one love, the human family, the cosmic family, right? That's Pisces. So, great expression of the water element, a high expression of the water element. And now we can see these three archetypes in their triad modality, right? We get, as we just talked about, Cancer establishes, sets the roots, the foundation, the family, the home, right? This safe space for the emotions to be expressed, to feel safe and secure within ourselves, our own emotional nature. That's Cancer. Scorpio then wants to pull that emotional power unto itself. It wants to explore it through others, through deep relating, through sexuality, through merger, right? It wants to go deep. It's not afraid to go deep, right? Scorpio is often associated with the taboo in many ways because it understands that there's probably power there. Tell Scorpio you can't do something and then go watch them do it. That's exactly what they'll do. And then that energy, that fixed energy, Pisces wants to take that power dynamic that Scorpio has done such a great job of consolidating, and it wants to mutate it. It wants to distribute it. It wants to share it. Literally share the love, right? We're all part of it. We all deserve to be loved universally. So this is the water cycle. And so that completes our initial exploration of the 12 signs of the zodiac by looking at these 4 triads of elemental groups, right? And as I've said, this is not an exhaustive exploration of all of these zodiac signs, these archetypes. We could deeply explore each one of them. And hopefully in future episodes we will. We're going to look at these from different angles on their own and in consideration of this sort of developmental wheel that the zodiac does represent at the same time. But we want to take this elemental approach because it's using all of our fundamentals, these principles that we've been using from the beginning, and it's giving us this, like I said, hopefully a more intuitive understanding of what all these signs really mean at a fundamental level. And I'd love to know, after going through these, for those of you who have followed along thus far, let me know in the comments how this is helping you. Is it giving you more insights? What is your sun sign? Are you a water sign, an air, a fire, an earth sign? Are you getting something much more profound and insightful about yourself just by virtue of understanding some of these elemental and polarity underpinnings that your sign represents? Be really curious to know. But this is really helpful, I think. This is, for me, when I practice astrology, I use this elemental approach. I really bring things down to the element. And we're going to learn in later episodes when we start really looking at birth charts. We look for that elemental dominance sometimes. You often find in charts they have more fire or more air, or fire and air, and there's a lack of an element. There's a lack of water. There's a lack of earth. So it could be an ungrounded person. It could lack expression in its emotional nature, which needs to be compensated for. And that's how we use astrology to really work with our strengths and our weaknesses. A lot of times it comes down to this elemental basis. So that's what we're getting by using this method. We've been doing that all along here. And, that's what the elemental foundation gives us, right? This elements expressing themselves modally. And what we've got here by going through all 4 of the elements and all 3 of the modes and examining how each of these elements is expressing itself 3 different ways, we've essentially built the zodiac. We've gotten this under the hood appreciation of what these 12 signs of the zodiac represent. That there's this symbolic meaning encoded within each of these individual symbols, right? Beneath Aries is this cardinal expression of the fire element, right? Beneath Taurus is this fixed expression of the earth element, right? Beneath Gemini, right, is the spiraling, mutable energy of air. So, as we've said, astrology is a symbolic language, and these symbols are how we communicate, how we speak astrology. So hopefully you're really learning something very fundamental, very intuitive about the signs of the zodiac. And this is really going to help us as we move forward. And in the next episode, we're going to move to our next of the 5 principles, the 5 founding principles, the big 5, as I call them, of astrology. And that's the principle of the houses. So just like we have 12 signs of the zodiac, we also have 12 houses in the zodiac. And as we defined in our first episode, we think of the signs as being the qualities of experience. And what we're going to discover in the next episode as we explore the houses is that they represent the fields of experience, right? These are the areas of our lives. These are the parts of ourselves that we use in different situations, in different relationships. And we'll see how eventually the wheel of the zodiac incorporates both the signs and the houses in a very unique and, I think, magical way. So that's what we have to look forward to. That's going to do it for this episode. As always, if you're finding this series helpful, insightful, enlightening, if you're learning something, if you're enjoying the process, greatly appreciate you hitting the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. It's helping me grow this channel, which is something I'm very committed to doing. As always, I appreciate the time and energy and focus and attention. I know your time is valuable, and I deeply appreciate that you spend this time with me and are endeavoring to learn this beautiful, elegant, ancient art and science that is astrology, because I think the more of us who can speak this language, I think it's going to make a better world. I firmly believe that. So that's my commitment anyway. All right. Till next time, y'all. We'll see you then.